Welcome to The Adventure of the Lambeth Spark, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series Sherlock Holmes, The Physician's Ledger, playing in the year 1893. The accounts which follow were never intended for the pages of the Strand. They are drawn from my private medical casebook, what I termed my physician's ledger, bequeathed and sealed for a century. Herein lie the grittier tales from our practice, those mysteries that turned not upon a dropped handkerchief, but upon forensic pathology and the nascent, often dark, science of the human mind. I shall begin my account with a grim affair that tested the very limits of our knowledge, a case I have recorded as The Adventure of the Lambeth Spark. Chapter 1. The November fog, a palpable entity of smoke and river damp, pressed its chilling grey face against the windows of 221B Baker Street. It muffled the sharp clatter of hansom cabs on the wet cobbles below, reducing the city's ceaseless roar to a distant, mournful drone, a sound swallowed by the oppressive damp. Within our sitting-room, however, a cheerful fire crackled and spat in the grate, its light dancing upon the chaos of Holmes's chemical apparatus and the neat stacks of my medical journals. It was an evening for quiet contemplation, yet I could feel the energy radiating from my friend's restless pacing. His singular mind chafed against the idleness. "Watson, this miasma is a most effective suppressor of criminal enterprise. The footpad and the burglar are as blind as their victims. We may as well be entombed for all the stimulation it offers," Sherlock Holmes said. Before I could offer a reply, the sharp peal of our doorbell shattered the quiet. A moment later, Mrs. Hudson announced a visitor, a Dr. Bramwell. The woman who entered brought the damp chill of the street with her. She was of middle years, her face etched with intelligence and the unmistakable lines of fatigue. Rain beaded upon the shoulders of her dark travelling coat, and she clutched a leather portfolio as if it were a shield. "Pray, take the seat by the fire, Doctor. You have come from Lambeth with some urgency, and on a matter of professional distress, if the state of your medical bag and the haste with which you alighted from your carriage are any indication," declared Sherlock Holmes. Our visitor started, her eyes wide with surprise, but she wasted no time on pleasantries. Her voice was steady, imbued with a gravity that commanded attention. "Mr. Holmes, you are as perceptive as I was led to believe. I have come because the constabulary is blind, and men are dying. I am a physician to the poor in the district, and in the last 2 months 4 men from Finch's electrical works have met their end. The official verdict in each case is accidental electrocution," answered Dr. Eleanor Bramwell. "A tragic but not uncommon fate in such a new and dangerous industry," Dr. John Watson replied. Dr. Bramwell turned her intense gaze upon me, and I felt the full force of her conviction as if it were a physical presence in the room. "Common, perhaps, but I have attended these men, Dr. Watson. I have seen their bodies. The burns are anomalous. They are not the deep, carbonized wounds one expects from a powerful current. They are more like chemical lesions, yellowish, corrosive, and they seem to spread even after death. The men fall ill with tremors and confusion days before the final accident," said Dr. Eleanor Bramwell. I confess my professional curiosity was thoroughly piqued. The symptoms she described were inconsistent with any electrical injury I had ever encountered or read about. They were medically nonsensical. That is most peculiar. A corrosive burn that mimics an electrical one? It defies conventional pathology. I must consult my own library. There are obscure industrial poisons which produce the most bizarre symptoms. Dr. John Watson added. It was then I saw the change. Holmes, who had been slumped in his armchair, straightened with a sudden sharp energy that was almost startling. His languor did not simply vanish, it was cast aside like a heavy coat. The bored dilettante was gone, replaced by the keen-eyed hunter, his gaze now fixed upon our visitor with an electrifying intensity. His long, thin fingers came together, steepling before him, a puzzle that has stumped both the police and the medical faculty. Doctor, you have brought us a problem of the most stimulating character. You say you attended these men. I imagine, then, that you kept records? Sherlock Holmes responded. Meticulous ones, Mr. Holmes. I suspected foul play from the second death. They are all here in my ledger, responded Dr. Eleanor Bramwell. She patted the leather portfolio in her lap. The firelight caught a glint in Holmes's eyes, a spark of pure intellectual excitement. The Lambeth fog and its attendant gloom were utterly forgotten, banished by the thrill of a truly singular investigation. A profound silence settled upon our rooms at 221B Baker Street, broken only by the soft hiss and crackle of the fire in the grate. Outside, the November fog pressed against the window panes, muffling the familiar rumble of carriage wheels on the cobbled street below. Dr. Bramwell had placed her casebook, a heavy leather-bound ledger, upon the table between us, and the air was thick with the unspoken gravity of its contents. "Your chronicle of this tragedy, Doctor, may I?" explained Sherlock Holmes. He did not wait for an answer, but drew the book towards him, his long, thin fingers tracing the worn cover. A faint creak of leather accompanied its opening. His face, usually a mask of detached intellectualism, assumed a look of predatory focus. He leaned forward, his hawk-like features illuminated by the gas lamp, and the only sound for a great while was the dry rustle of turning pages. I watched him, but my thoughts drifted to the ledger itself. As a medical man, I have always held a deep respect for a well-kept record. In my own recent studies concerning the effects of industrial poisons upon the constitution, a grim but necessary field, I had come to appreciate that the truth of a malady often lies not in a single dramatic symptom, but in the careful collation of seemingly minor details over time. Dr. Bramwell's script was a model of clarity, precise, devoid of emotion, yet painting a picture of suffering more vivid than any artist's brush. Each entry was a testament to her diligence, a quiet rebellion against the official narrative of carelessness and accident. Suddenly, Holmes made a low sound, a hum of intense satisfaction that I knew well. He tapped a single page with a triumphant finger. "Here, Watson, here is the crux of it. The police see 4 separate tragedies. Dr. Bramwell, with her superior medical eye, sees a pattern of pathology. But I see a signature," explained Sherlock Holmes. "A signature, Holmes? What can you mean?" responded Dr. John Watson. "The official reports state the men were electrocuted by contact with faulty wiring, yes? One would expect burns consistent with such an event, localized, deep, following the path of the current. But look at the doctor's notes. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. He angled the book so that both Dr. Bramwell and I could see. His finger rested upon a meticulous diagram of a man's hands. In 3 of the 4 cases, the burns are described as diffuse and are concentrated on the fingertips and palms. Not the sort of injury one sustains from grasping a live wire in a moment of panic. Furthermore, Dr. Bramwell notes a peculiar phosphorescence and a chemical scent she likens to garlic. Electricity, my dear doctor, does not smell of garlic. This is not the signature of an accident. It is the calling card of a poison, deduced Sherlock Holmes. Then I was right, replied Dr. Eleanor Bramwell. Her voice was low, trembling not with fear, but with the quiet vindication of her convictions. I knew it was something more. Holmes closed the ledger with a soft but decisive thud that echoed in the still room. He rose from his chair and stood before the fire, his tall, gaunt frame silhouetted against the flames. You were more than right, Doctor. You have provided the evidence that will unravel this affair. Scotland Yard sees only the march of progress and its unfortunate casualties. I see deliberate, calculated murder. Your appeal from Lambeth is accepted, Sherlock Holmes responded. A wave of palpable relief seemed to pass through Dr. Bramwell. The tension that had held her so rigidly seemed to ease from her shoulders. We must move quickly. The factory owner, this Mr. Finch, will not expect such a swift inquiry. We shall begin not with the cold machinery of his enterprise, but with the warm heart of the matter, the human cost. Tell me of the widow of the most recent victim, a Mrs. Gable, I believe your ledger said. Sherlock Holmes noted. And so our course was set. The game, as my friend was so fond of saying, was afoot. Our next step would take us from the clinical precision of a doctor's ledger into the fog-bound streets of Lambeth and the raw grief of a widow's home. Our hansom cab rattled south across the river. We left the familiar elegance of Marylebone for the grim, soot-stained warrens of Lambeth. A damp chill, peculiar to the riverside, seeped through the carriage walls, and the air grew thick with the smells of coal smoke and industry. Beside me, Dr. Bramwell sat erect, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, a portrait of quiet resolve. Holmes, meanwhile, was a coiled spring of energy. His keen eyes darted from window to window, absorbing every detail of the grim tableau outside. Poverty, Watson, has its own uniform. Observe the particular sheen on the brickwork here, a compound of damp and grime that speaks of generations of struggle, does it not? Sherlock Holmes responded. We alighted before a modest tenement, its stoop scrubbed clean in defiance of the surrounding decay. Dr. Bramwell led us up a narrow, creaking staircase to a door on the second landing. The flat, though sparsely furnished, was impeccably tidy. The only sounds were the solemn ticking of a mantel clock and the muffled cries of a vendor from the street below. A woman rose to greet us, her face pale and etched with a grief so profound it seemed to have stolen all her colour. This was Mrs. Gable. Mrs. Gable, these are the gentlemen I spoke of, Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson. They have come to help. Dr. Eleanor Bramwell said, It's very kind of you to call," Mrs. Gable said. Her voice, a mere whisper, was fragile as spun glass. Though Holmes offered his condolences with a surprising gentleness, his gaze swept the room, cataloguing every object, every shadow, before settling with full attention upon the widow. "Madam, your husband was an amateur photographer, I believe. Dr. Bramwell's notes were most specific on this point," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. "Oh, yes, sir. It was his only pleasure. He carried his camera everywhere. He was preparing some plates the night he left for his shift," remarked Mrs. Gable. At Holmes's request, she retrieved her husband's work coat from a hook behind the door. A faint, acrid odour, sharp and unfamiliar, clung to the heavy wool. With trembling hands, Mrs. Gable reached into an inner pocket. "There was this, sir. It's ruined." He kept a fresh plate in his coat, wrapped in black cloth, ready for a picture. When the police returned his things, it was like this, fogged, as if it had been left in the sun, Mrs. Gable said. She held out a small glass photographic plate. It was not merely fogged, it was almost entirely opaque. A milky, spectral whiteness clouded the glass, as if it had burned itself into the emulsion from within. Perhaps some chemical from the factory floor splashed upon the cloth wrapper. It would be a simple enough mishap to ruin a plate, wondered Dr. John Watson. "No, Watson, your explanation does not suffice. A liquid spill would produce a tide mark, an uneven stain. This effect is uniform, pervasive. This was not caused by something acting upon the plate from the outside. Rather, it is a radiation from within the coat itself. This is not a ruined photograph, it is a message from the dead," Sherlock Holmes said. His voice was low and intense, and a thrill of anticipation shot through me. He took the coat from the widow. Producing his powerful pocket lens, he began to scrutinize the lining of the pocket that had held the plate. The room was utterly silent, save for the ticking of the clock. After a moment, Holmes straightened up, a glint of triumph in his eyes. "Mrs. Gable, might I trouble you for a small envelope?" Sherlock Holmes said. With the utmost care, he used the tip of a penknife to scrape a minuscule sample of a pale, yellowish residue from the fabric seam. He then coaxed the fine powder into the envelope Mrs. Gable had provided. "Mr. Holmes, what is that substance?" responded Dr. Eleanor Bramwell. "It is the very heart of the matter, Doctor. It is the spark that gives a name to the fire consuming the men of Lambeth. And now I believe we know where we must go to find the furnace," Sherlock Holmes responded. We took our leave of the grieving widow. The click of the door latch behind us sounded terribly final. Once back in the damp chill of the street, a distant goods train rumbled. Holmes turned to me, his face set like granite. "We have seen the consequence, Watson. It is time to face the cause. Our next appointment is with Mr. Alistair Finch, the celebrated titan of industry," declared Sherlock Holmes. The cab ride from the widow's quiet street to the heart of Lambeth was a journey from one world to another. The oppressive silence of grief was replaced by the clamorous din of industry, a constant rhythmic hammering that seemed to vibrate in one's very bones. As we approached the Finch electrical lamp factory, its immense brick facade rose to dominate the skyline, chimneys breathing plumes of grey smoke into the already heavy air. In his pocket, Holmes carried the small, carefully folded paper containing the yellowish residue from the dead man's coat, a tiny, silent accusation that seemed to mock the roar of progress. We presented ourselves as journalists from a scientific periodical, an artifice that gained us immediate entry. The interior of the manufactory was a vast cavern of organized chaos. A great hum, deep and resonant, emanated from a row of dynamos. The air was filled with the sharp, clean scent of ozone. Sparks leapt from strange contraptions. Everywhere, men in heavy aprons moved with purpose, their shouts nearly lost in the mechanical symphony. It was a vision of a new and powerful age. We were met not by a foreman, but by the proprietor himself. Mr. Alistair Finch was a man whose presence filled the room as surely as the noise of his machines. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a mane of iron-grey hair. His voice carried effortlessly over the clangor. He was the very picture of a Titan of industry. Welcome, gentlemen. Welcome to the future. I am Alistair Finch. It is not every day the press takes an interest in the humble work of bringing light to our great nation. Please do not be shy. Ask anything you wish. Mr. Alistair Finch said. His handshake was firm, his eyes alight with a fervent, almost missionary zeal. He led us through the works. His voice was a powerful counterpoint to the machinery as he described the function of each station with infectious pride. He pointed out heavy rubber mats on the floors, insulated tools, and posted warnings regarding the dangers of the electrical current. A most impressive operation, Mr. Finch. One reads, however, of some unfortunate incidents, tragedies that must weigh heavily upon you. Sherlock Holmes responded. Holmes's tone was one of journalistic sympathy, yet I knew him well enough to detect the sharp, probing edge beneath it. Finch's expansive expression clouded over, his features composing themselves into a mask of profound sorrow. He stopped beside a great coil of copper wire and turned to face us, the din of the factory momentarily seeming to recede. Heavily is not the word, sir. They are scars upon my soul. Good men, hard-working men. But we stand at the frontier of a new science. Every great leap for mankind has its price. We build bridges, and men fall. We dig tunnels, and the earth claims its due. Here we harness the very lightning from the heavens, and sometimes, tragically, it strikes. We take every precaution, but this force, it is a wild and magnificent beast we are taming for the betterment of all. Mr. Alistair Finch said. He delivered this speech with the conviction of a statesman addressing Parliament. It was a masterful performance. I found myself almost persuaded by his rhetoric, by the sheer force of his personality. He was not a villain. To my mind, he was a visionary, grappling with the terrible necessities of progress. So you believe them to be nothing more than unavoidable accidents? Asked Dr. John Watson. He replied with a voice now low and solemn. What else could they be, Doctor? This work is my life. Those men were my responsibility. Their loss is a burden I shall carry to my grave. But I will not, I cannot allow it to halt the march towards a brighter, more illuminated future for every home in this city, said Mr. Alistair Finch. We took our leave. As the great factory doors closed behind us, the immense hum of the dynamos was cut off. The sudden quiet of the street was jarring. The air, though still thick with coal smoke, seemed thin and empty. I glanced at my companion, expecting to see some sign of doubt. Instead, his face was a grim, unreadable mask. A fine orator, Watson. He would have done well on the stage, deduced Sherlock Holmes. His voice was cold, devoid of the admiration I had felt. He offered no further comment, but his hand went instinctively to his coat pocket, and I knew his thoughts were no longer on the charismatic Mr. Finch, but on the small paper of yellowish dust that lay within. The memory of Mr. Alistair Finch's impassioned defence of progress followed us back to Baker Street. His resonant voice seemed to echo in the clatter of our hansom's wheels on the wet cobblestones. Once within the familiar quiet of our rooms, however, the industrialist's grand pronouncements faded, replaced by a more pressing and sinister reality. A thick silence descended. Holmes drew the gas lamp closer, its steady hiss the only sound. He had spread the labourer's coarse woolen coat upon our table, and now, with delicate tweezers, transferred a minute quantity of a yellowish residue to a glass slide. He adjusted the brass cylinder of his microscope, his entire being focused upon the eyepiece. The air grew still. I found myself holding my breath, watching the sharp, hawk-like profile of my friend as he peered into a world invisible to my own eye. After a long moment, I felt compelled to break the tension. "Surely, Holmes, it is nothing more than sulphur. The factories of Lambeth are rife with such substances. It is used in the vulcanization of India rubber as a bleaching agent. 100 different industrial processes could account for a simple dusting of brimstone," asked Dr. John Watson. I spoke with a confidence I did not entirely feel, hoping to ground the affair in the mundane and dispel the aura of the macabre that had begun to cling to it. Holmes did not look up from his instrument. A dry, almost pitying chuckle was his initial reply. "My dear Watson, your logic is, as ever, admirable in its straightforwardness. You see a yellow powder in a factory district and conclude it is the most common yellow powder found therein. It is the trap of the obvious into which the finest minds may fall," replied Sherlock Holmes. He finally straightened up, his grey eyes alight with an unnerving fire. He gestured towards the slide with the tip of his finger, though he did not touch it. "Sulphur, in its elemental form, presents as crystalline, but under magnification this specimen is amorphous, almost greasy in its texture. It clings to the fibres of the coat with a peculiar tenacity," remarked Sherlock Holmes. He paused, letting the observations settle in the quiet room, each detail adding to a growing sense of dread. "Furthermore, and this is the critical point, it is not inert. I fancy I can detect the faintest radiation of warmth from it, a minute energetic property that common sulphur does not possess," Sherlock Holmes noted. He fell silent. His gaze drifted towards a small wrapped package on the mantelpiece. It was the photographic plate from the first victim's lodgings, the one that had been inexplicably fogged, despite being undeveloped and sealed. "The plate? You believe this dust is responsible for that?" Dr. John Watson replied. "I believe this dust emits something, a force, a light unseen by our eyes, yet potent enough to spoil a silver nitrate emulsion.
This is the only explanation. It connects the strange burns Dr. Bramwell described, the fogged photograph, and the faint glow reported by the grieving Mrs. Gable. We are not dealing with a simple industrial poison, Watson. We are dealing with something new, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. His voice was low and grave. With a sudden burst of energy, he crossed to his chemical corner, the floorboards groaning under his brisk tread. He returned not with test tubes or beakers, but with a fresh, unexposed photographic plate from a sealed box. The scrape of the cardboard box being opened was sharp in the quiet room. He handled it with the utmost care, its glassy surface reflecting the gaslight. Words and theories are insufficient. We require proof. I shall construct a small, light-proof box. We will place a sample of this residue within it, resting directly upon this plate. Then we shall wait. He looked from the sinister yellow dust to the pristine photographic plate, a grim anticipation hardening his features. He expected to capture not a picture, but the very shadow of death itself. Our familiar sitting-room at 221B Baker Street had been rendered utterly foreign. Heavy blankets pinned across the windows plunged the room into a profound darkness, a blackness so complete it felt a physical presence. The only light was a single ruby-red lantern on the mantelpiece, which cast long, distorted shadows and painted Holmes's hawk-like features in a demonic glow. The air, usually thick with the scent of his strong shag tobacco, was now sharp with the acrid tang of developing chemicals, a smell that caught at the back of the throat. Holmes himself was a study in absolute concentration. He stood over a porcelain tray, his long, nimble fingers moving with the delicate precision of a surgeon. The only sound in the oppressive silence was the gentle, rhythmic sloshing of the fluid as he rocked the tray back and forth. Within it lay a glass photographic plate, upon which he had, an hour earlier, placed a small mound of the sinister yellow dust we had procured from the factory. He had exposed it to nothing save the darkness itself. "Is there anything yet, Holmes? It seems an experiment destined for failure. How can an image be formed from nothing but blackness?" Dr. John Watson added. My voice was a low murmur, for the tension in the room was such that a loud noise might have shattered it. Holmes did not look up, his gaze fixed upon the submerged plate. "Patience is a virtue in science as in life, my dear fellow. We are not seeking a reflected image, but a direct imprint, the substance's own energetic signature. We are attempting to photograph not light, but its ghastly, self-generated inverse," Sherlock Holmes responded. He fell silent again. Minutes stretched into an eternity, marked only by the faint ticking of the clock, a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness. Then I saw him stiffen. He lifted the plate from the bath with a pair of wooden tongs, the liquid dripping from it with a soft patter. He held it against the faint ruby light. I leaned forward, my heart thumping against my ribs. The plate was not blank, nor did it show any stain or scorch mark. Instead, where the dust had rested, the emulsion was clouded by a ghostly, swirling fog. It was a spectral miasma, an unnatural shadow that seemed to writhe in the dim light, as if we had captured the very breath of a phantom on the glass. A chill, entirely unrelated to the draught from the window, crept down my spine. "Good heavens, Holmes, what is it? The plate is ruined, fogged completely," Dr. John Watson inquired. A thin smile played upon his lips, a grim and terrible thing to behold in that crimson gloom. His voice, when it came, was low and resonant with a triumphant energy. "Ruined, my dear Watson, your eye for the practical is, as ever, unerringly literal. On the contrary, it is a spectacular success. You see fog, I see definitive proof," Sherlock Holmes responded. "A common substance, such as your persistent sulphur theory, would have merely stained the plate or reacted inertly. But this is an emission. The compound has actively projected an energy, a force invisible to our eyes, yet potent enough to agitate the emulsion through sheer proximity. It has not been photographed, it has painted its own shadow," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. He set the plate down carefully to dry. The implications of his words were staggering. We were dealing not with a simple poison, but with a compound that radiated a malevolent power, a force that could explain the deep chemical burns and the poor widow's story of glowing hands. This confirms my hypothesis. The faint warmth I felt was not my imagination. The material is active, Watson, dangerously so. Its composition, however, is beyond my own, admittedly extensive knowledge of toxicology. Standard analysis will not suffice. He began to unpin the blankets, allowing the grey London daylight to flood the room once more, dispelling the shadows and the sense of dread, though only slightly. He turned to me, his eyes alight with the fire of the chase. "We require a specialist, a man who operates at the fringes of chemistry, who deals not in the common reagents of the pharmacopoeia, but in the esoteric and the obscure. There is only one man in London with the requisite knowledge and the flexible morality to assist us. Fetch your hat and coat, Watson. We must pay a visit to Mr. Silas Thorne," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. The ghostly image upon the photographic plate, that inexplicable fog born of invisible energy, had propelled my friend into a state of intense, focused activity. Our breakfast was consumed in silence, after which Holmes announced our destination with the crisp finality of a judge's sentence. Our hansom cab rattled through a labyrinth of narrow, gaslit streets south of the river, where the grand facades of the Strand yielded to the grimy brickwork of a forgotten London. The air grew thick with the tang of coal smoke and something sharper, more industrial, a fitting overture for the man we sought. The nature of the poison is beyond the common run, Watson. We require a specialist, not merely in toxicology, but in the dark alleyways of chemistry, where commerce and science meet in unholy union. Mr. Silas Thorne is such a man, remarked Sherlock Holmes. He indicated a narrow storefront, its windows so coated with the grime of decades as to be nearly opaque. A small tarnished brass plate read simply, "S. Thorne, Analytical Chemist." As Holmes pushed open the door, a small bell jangled discordantly overhead, its sound swallowed by the oppressive quiet within. The shop was a cavern of shadows, its walls lined with countless glass-stoppered bottles that glinted like malevolent eyes in the dim light. The air was a potent blend of bitter almonds, vinegar, and a sharp metallic scent that pricked at the back of the throat.
From behind a counter cluttered with beakers and retorts, a man emerged, wiping his hands on a stained apron. He was thin and pale, with spectacles perched precariously on a sharp nose, and the weary stoop of a man who spent his life peering at minutiae. This was Silas Thorne. "Mr. Holmes, an unexpected visit. I trust you are not here about the matter of the forged banknotes. My analysis was quite conclusive," said Mr. Silas Thorne. His voice was as dry as dust.
"Your work was, as always, impeccable, Mr. Thorne. Today, however, I bring you a problem of a far more esoteric nature. It concerns a compound of which I have no physical sample, only a description of its effects," deduced Sherlock Holmes. Thorne gestured to a pair of rickety stools, his expression one of mild academic interest. Holmes, declining the seat, began to pace the narrow space between the counters, detailing the facts with clinical precision. "Imagine, if you will, a substance with 3 distinct properties. First, it causes death by apparent electrocution, yet leaves chemical burns inconsistent with a simple current. Second, it imparts a faint, spectral luminescence upon the victim, a glow visible only in absolute darkness. And third, most curious of all, its residue, even when sealed in a lead-lined box, emits an energy capable of fogging a photographic plate," deduced Sherlock Holmes. As Holmes spoke, the chemist's detached curiosity evaporated. He stopped polishing a glass slide, his hand frozen in mid-air. His gaze sharpened, and a deep line appeared between his brows. The air in the shop seemed to grow colder. His voice, when he finally spoke, had shed its arid quality, replaced by a low, grave intensity. "A glow, you say, from the body itself? And it affects a photographic plate through lead? Tell me, Mr. Holmes, do these unfortunate accidents occur at the new Finch Electrical Works in Lambeth?" Mr. Silas Thorne answered. Holmes stopped his pacing and turned, his eyes boring into the chemist. "Your question is an answer in itself. You know of this," replied Sherlock Holmes. Thorne gave a short, bitter laugh, devoid of humour. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the counter until his knuckles were white. "Know of it? I practically invented the foundational process. Alistair Finch was once my partner. He took my research into industrial phosphors, research that was meant for safer illumination, and twisted it. He found a way to amplify its energy, to weaponize it for some damnable industrial process, caring nothing for the consequences. He stole my life's work, Mr. Holmes, and left me with this emporium of poisons and cures, while he built an empire upon my ruin." Mr. Silas Thorne answered. His voice was tight with a venom that had clearly festered for years. Here was the motive Holmes had sought, a potent blend of justice, vengeance, and self-interest. I found my own voice, though it felt thick in my throat. "Then you can identify this compound?" asked Dr. John Watson. He looked from me to Holmes, his eyes burning with a cold fire. "I can do more than that. I can tell you how to prove its presence. But you must understand, you are not dealing with a common murderer. Finch has created something new, a phantom that kills with invisible fire. Be exceptionally careful, gentlemen, for I fear it will not be long before another spark is extinguished," answered Mr. Silas Thorne.
A profound silence settled in the cluttered shop, broken only by the faint hiss of a Bunsen burner in the back room. Thorne's words hung in the air, heavy and cold as a shroud. We had come seeking the name of a chemical, and had instead been handed a prophecy of doom. The memory of our interview with Mr. Thorne lingered in our rooms like a chemical stain, acrid and unsettling. Outside, a persistent November rain lashed the window panes, each gust carrying the mournful cry of a foghorn from the Thames. I had just settled into my armchair with a medical journal when a hansom cab clattered to a halt outside, breaking the evening's quiet. Moments later, a frantic, desperate knocking rattled our front door. "It is Dr. Bramwell. Only a matter of extreme urgency would bring her out on such a night," replied Sherlock Holmes. Holmes had not even lowered his paper, yet his voice, usually languid, now held a keen edge of certainty. Mrs. Hudson showed her in, and the physician stood framed in the doorway, her cloak dripping onto the rug, her face pale and drawn with exhaustion and something more, a profound and terrible grief. "Mr. Holmes, it has happened again. Another man is dead. Thomas Green, a coil winder. He leaves a wife and 4 children," remarked Dr. Eleanor Bramwell. Her voice, usually so steady and professional, trembled on the last words. I rose to offer her a chair by the fire, but she seemed not to notice. The symptoms were identical. The burns, the convulsions. Scotland Yard has already been and gone. They barely looked at the body. They say the case is all but closed," Dr. Eleanor Bramwell said. "Closed? But on what grounds?" remarked Dr. John Watson. Holmes lowered the evening paper, extending it, his expression grim. A bold headline announced the factory owner's response. "On the grounds of a most convenient confession, Doctor, or rather a most public accusation. Mr. Alistair Finch has fed the press, and by extension the police, a perfect villain," explained Sherlock Holmes. I took the paper, my gaze falling upon the damning column, and read it aloud. Finch, in a master stroke of public relations, decried the death as a tragic act of industrial sabotage. He named a recently dismissed foreman, a Mr. Robert Clegg, as the perpetrator. The article painted a damning picture. Clegg was a known union agitator with a fiery temper, dismissed for insubordination only a fortnight ago. He had been overheard in a Lambeth public house vowing to make Finch pay. Good heavens, Holmes, it says here Clegg was the factory's chief electrician for 5 years. He would have the precise knowledge to stage such an incident, to make murder look like a malfunction. Dr. John Watson commented. And so the constabulary searches for this one man, while the true poison continues its work, responded Dr. Eleanor Bramwell. Her voice held a note of utter despair. Holmes rose and began to pace before the hearth, the firelight casting his hawk-like features into sharp relief. The quiet scuff of his slippers on the rug was the only sound for a long moment. "It is too perfect, Watson. Observe the mechanics of it. A man dies. Before the official inquiry can even begin, the owner presents a suspect. Not just any suspect, but one with motive, means, and opportunity. The motive is public, a grudge. The means are specific, an expert's knowledge of electricity. The police have been given a complete narrative, gift-wrapped and tied with a bow. They need not think, they need only act," Sherlock Holmes said. "But surely it is a plausible line of inquiry," Dr. John Watson added.
"It is a masterpiece of misdirection. Finch has not merely pointed a finger, he has illuminated it with a spotlight so dazzling that no one is inclined to look at the shadows in which he himself stands. He has turned a corporate crisis into a simple story of a disgruntled labourer's revenge. Lestrade will have Clegg in custody by morning, convinced he has saved the London electrical industry from a saboteur," declared Sherlock Holmes. He stopped his pacing and turned to Dr. Bramwell, his voice softening, yet retaining its keen intensity. "Do not despair, Doctor. Let the police chase their phantom. It gives us the freedom to hunt the true creature responsible for these deaths. Their investigation ends with Mr. Clegg. Ours is just beginning." We had not long to wait for the official confirmation of our fears. A heavy, purposeful tread upon the stair, a sound I had come to associate with the arrival of Inspector Lestrade, preceded a sharp rap on our door. He entered with a gust of damp November air, his face flushed with a satisfaction that seemed entirely misplaced. His voice boomed in the quiet of our sitting-room. "Well, Holmes, the Lambeth spark case is all but concluded. We have our man in custody, the foreman, Daniel Crowe, a thorough scoundrel and just as bitter as Finch described," said Inspector Lestrade. Holmes, who had been examining a slide beneath his microscope, did not look up. The only sound was the gentle hiss of the gaslight. "And your evidence, Lestrade?" he asked, his tone deceptively mild. "Does it extend beyond the factory owner's convenient accusation?" Sherlock Holmes said. "He had motive, means, and opportunity," the inspector retorted, ticking the points off on his thick fingers. "Dismissed a fortnight ago, made public threats, and he alone possessed the electrical knowledge to stage such a thing. The case is as solid as the cobbles on the street," responded Inspector Lestrade. "It is, I fear, rather too solid," Holmes murmured, finally turning from his instrument. "It has been manufactured to be so. Mr. Finch has not merely supplied you with a suspect, he has handed you a complete narrative, an act of generosity that I find deeply suspect. We shall see for ourselves. Come, Watson." Our investigation plunged us deep into the warren of streets that made up South London, a world away from the grand terraces of Westminster. We found ourselves in a pub named the Mason's Arms, a place thick with the haze of cheap tobacco and the low murmur of guarded conversations. The air smelled of stale ale and damp wool. Here, mentioning Daniel Crowe's name earned us only sealed lips and suspicious glances. Every inquiry became a battle against a wall of communal distrust. "It is hopeless, Holmes," I said in a low voice, after a burly dock worker had flatly denied ever knowing the man. "They will tell us nothing. They see us as agents of the law that has taken one of their own," commented Dr. John Watson. "Patience, my dear fellow," he replied, his eyes scanning the room with an intensity that missed nothing. "Observe the barman. He polishes the same glass for the third time and keeps his gaze fixed upon the door to the rear parlour. He is not merely disinterested, he is actively concealing something," replied Sherlock Holmes. Holmes approached the bar, and though his words were too low for me to catch, his quiet persuasion soon had the man speaking in hushed, reluctant tones.
For the next hour we painstakingly pieced together fragments: a nervous young man's hurried mention of a stout delivery, a charwoman's whispered comment about the parlour being booked for a private gathering. Each witness proved unreliable, their memories clouded by fear or loyalty. It was a frustrating and seemingly fruitless exercise.
It was only as our hansom cab rattled back over Waterloo Bridge, the lights of the city smearing across the rain-slicked windows, that Holmes finally brought order to the chaos. They were all telling a version of the truth, Watson, but not the one for which we were asking. The gathering was not a union meeting. The secrecy was not due to sedition. Notice how 2 of the men we questioned had identical chalk stains upon their right cuffs, explained Sherlock Holmes.
"I confess I did not," asked Dr. John Watson. "The chalk of a billiard cue, and the man who claimed to have left early had a small tear in his jacket, consistent with leaning over a card table. Crow was not plotting sabotage, my friend. He was engaged in a clandestine game of whist for stakes far higher than he could afford. His alibi is a secret he is as eager to keep as the police are to ignore," deduced Sherlock Holmes.
Within a day, Holmes located 2 of the other card players and secured their grudging testimony. The foreman's alibi was irrefutable. He had been losing money at cards at the very moment the latest victim had met his end. Lestrade's perfect case dissolved into smoke. His voice was grim as he stood by the fireplace that evening, the telegram confirming Crow's release crumpled in his hand. Finch's gambit was masterful. He created a diversion so compelling that it has cost us precious time. With the foreman exonerated, we are left with no suspect at all, only the crime itself, explained Sherlock Holmes. He fell silent, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. The wind howled softly in the chimney, a mournful counterpoint to the ticking of the mantel clock. We must abandon the hunt for the man and focus entirely upon the method. Our only path forward now lies in a bottle of chemical residue. Let us pray that Mr. Thorne, our chemist, can give us the answers that men cannot.
Though we had proven the foreman's innocence, a cold sense of dread had settled upon me. We had eliminated a suspect, yet the true nature of the crime remained shrouded in a fog as thick as any that rolled from the Thames. It was this very fog we sought to dispel upon entering the chemical shop of Mr. Silas Thorne. Inside, the air was sharp and acrid, a medley of reagents that pricked the senses, while from a back room came the gentle, rhythmic bubbling of some unseen concoction. From behind a curtain of green baize, Thorne himself emerged. He was a thin, precise man, with ink stains on his cuffs and spectacles perched high on his nose. After wiping his hands on a cloth and leaving a faint yellow smear, he nodded towards a microscope on his counter. His voice was as dry as dust. "An extraordinary substance, Mr. Holmes, quite extraordinary. It took me 2 days of distillation and spectral analysis to isolate the active element from the residue on the victim's boot," said Mr. Silas Thorne. "And your conclusion?" Holmes asked, his tone betraying an intense, coiled energy. Sherlock Holmes noted. Thorne picked up a small lead-lined box from his workbench. For a moment, the soft clink of glass against metal was the only sound. "It is a poison, gentlemen, but of a kind I have never before encountered. An experimental derivative of white phosphorus. Its primary action is on the nervous system, a swift and total paralysis. Mr. Silas Thorne replied, I felt a chill creep up my spine that had nothing to do with the damp evening air. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a fierce light. And the burns, Mr. Thorne? Dr. Bramwell was most insistent on the burns, deduced Sherlock Holmes.
Ah, yes, a secondary and most insidious property. The compound is highly corrosive to organic tissue. On contact, it causes a rapid necrosis that blackens the skin and chars the flesh beneath. To the layman's eye, it would be indistinguishable from a severe electrical burn. But medically, as Dr. Watson would know, the cellular damage is purely chemical, a poison that masquerades as an accident of industry. The chemist's words struck me with the force of a physical blow. A dozen disparate facts suddenly coalesced in my mind with horrifying clarity. Dr. Bramwell's descriptions of anomalous cell death, the lingering illness of the workers, the strange chemical burns that defied all explanation, and then the simple, haunting words of a grieving widow. My own voice sounded hollow in my ears. Mrs. Gable, the widow, she said her husband's hands glowed faintly in the larder after his death. This compound, does it phosphoresce? Dr. John Watson commented. In its unrefined state? Oh, most certainly, the chemist confirmed, oblivious to the gravity of his statement. A faint greenish light, a curious property, Mr. Silas Thorne replied. I looked at Holmes, a wave of professional horror washing over me. I had spent weeks poring over toxicology texts and journals, searching for a known agent. But this was something new, something monstrous born of the new science. This was an industrial poison beyond the scope of any medical text ever written. My God, Holmes, I breathed, this is not just murder. It is a human experiment conducted on the factory floor, wondered Dr. John Watson. Holmes stood up, his face set like granite. The faint hiss of a gas lamp seemed to underscore the grim silence that had fallen over the small shop. His voice was low, yet it carried a terrible weight. He is creating the future, Watson, and paving its path with corpses. Mr. Thorne, you have provided the final piece. We now know the weapon. The time has come to confront the architect of this slaughter, observed Sherlock Holmes. The grim silence that had fallen upon our rooms at 221B Baker Street was heavier than any November fog. Mr. Thorne's chilling revelation had left us suspended in a state of horrified comprehension. The fire in the hearth sputtered and sank, casting long dancing shadows that seemed to mock the gravity of our thoughts. Dr. Bramwell sat rigid in her chair, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. My own mind raced, striving to reconcile the medical horrors I now understood with the callous ambition that must have set them in motion. It was Holmes who finally broke the spell. He rose from his armchair and stood before the mantelpiece, his tall, spare figure silhouetted against the dying embers. When he spoke, his voice, stripped of its usual intellectual amusement, carried a cold, hard edge, more terrible than any outburst of passion. It is a tapestry woven from greed, arrogance, and the most cynical disregard for human life I have ever encountered. Each of you has provided a crucial thread, replied Sherlock Holmes. He turned his piercing gaze first to our guest, You, Dr. Bramwell, were the beginning. Your refusal to accept the convenient explanation of accidental electrocution, your meticulous notes on burns that were not burns, that was the first tear in Mr. Finch's carefully constructed fabrication, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. I only knew that what I saw defied medical science as I knew it. I could not let those men's deaths be dismissed as mere factory mishaps, Dr. Eleanor Bramwell replied. Holmes gave a sharp nod of approval, then began to pace, the floorboards groaning faintly beneath his steps. Then came the testimony of the widow, Mrs. Gable. A simple observation, so strange that the police disregarded it as the ramblings of a grief-addled mind. Her husband's hands, she said, glowed faintly in the larder. A phosphorescence, not a symptom of electricity, but of something else entirely, something that radiated. Sherlock Holmes responded. He paused, his eyes finding mine. Which led to your experiment, Watson, the fogged photographic plate. That was the proof. An invisible energy, potent enough to impress itself upon a chemical emulsion. It was then I knew we were not hunting for a faulty machine, but for a poison of an entirely new and terrible sort, Sherlock Holmes noted. He stopped his pacing and brought his fist down softly upon the mantelpiece. In the silence that followed, the ticking of the clock seemed unnaturally loud. Alistair Finch required a more brilliant, more durable filament for his electric lamps to outpace his rivals. In this thorium compound he found it, but he also found that it was lethal. Handling it, even for short periods, produced a slow, inexorable decay of the flesh. So, what does this captain of industry do? Does he abandon his discovery for the sake of his men? No, he relabels the cause of death. He uses his own factory, a place of supposed progress, as a shield, knowing that any coroner would attribute the symptoms to the high-voltage equipment that was everywhere present. He knowingly, methodically, sacrificed his workers upon the altar of his own profit, remarked Sherlock Holmes. A cold fury radiated from him, an indignation so profound it seemed to chill the very air in the room. He had laid the entire sordid picture before us, and it was more monstrous than I could have imagined. Good heavens, Holmes, the man is a monster, Dr. John Watson inquired. He is a product of his age, Watson, an age that worships progress without questioning its cost. But this cost is too high. The law must intervene, deduced Sherlock Holmes. But what can be done? Scotland Yard has already closed the case, replied Dr. Eleanor Bramwell. Holmes turned, a glint of steel in his eyes that I knew all too well. The hunt was on. Then we shall force them to reopen it. We will confront Finch directly. Tomorrow morning we shall pay a visit to the Lambeth factory. You, Doctor, will bring your medical notes. Watson, you will act as witness. I shall bring the truth. Mr. Finch believes himself a titan of industry. It is time he was introduced to the consequences of his ambition, remarked Sherlock Holmes. The factory of Mr. Alistair Finch was a monument to the new age, a vast cathedral of brick and iron that hummed with a ceaseless, rhythmic energy. The very air, thick with the scent of hot metal and ozone, seemed to vibrate with the power it contained. When we were shown into the proprietor's office, the contrast was jarring, almost a physical blow. Here all was polished mahogany, rich leather, and silent, ordered prosperity. A grand clock on the mantelpiece ticked with a sonorous, unhurried beat, a sound entirely at odds with the frantic pulse of the works beyond the thick oak door. Mr. Alistair Finch rose from behind his enormous desk. He was a man built on the same scale as his ambitions, broad, immaculately dressed, with a face that radiated an unshakable self-assurance. He gestured to the chairs before him, his smile a veneer of civility. "Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson, to what do I owe the pleasure of this unexpected deputation? And you have brought a guest," answered Mr. Alistair Finch. His gaze flickered towards Dr. Bramwell, a hint of dismissal in his eyes. Holmes did not take the offered seat, choosing instead to stand before the desk, his tall, spare frame a stark rebuke to Finch's comfortable opulence, a silent challenge I felt keenly. "We are not here for pleasure, Mr. Finch. We are here on the matter of your deceased employees. 3 men, all lost to what your company and the constabulary have labelled electrical accidents," Sherlock Holmes said. Finch's smile tightened at the edges. He leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning in protest as he steepled his fingers. "A tragic, yet unavoidable cost of progress, I am afraid. We work at the very frontier of science. The risks are considerable," Mr. Alistair Finch said. "The risks of electricity are known. The symptoms these men presented are not. Dr. Bramwell, who attended their families, noted several peculiarities which she, with admirable diligence, recorded. Sherlock Holmes responded. At this, Dr. Bramwell stepped forward, and I felt a surge of admiration for her courage. Her voice was steady and clear, a surgeon's scalpel dissecting Finch's comfortable narrative. The burns, Mr. Finch, were not consistent with simple electrocution. They were deep, chemical in nature, and resisted all conventional treatment. There was also significant damage to the jawbone in 2 of the men, a necrosis quite alien to electrical shock," replied Dr. Eleanor Bramwell. A flicker of unease crossed Finch's eyes, visible even to me, and to me it was as if a hairline crack had appeared in a great dam. His confident posture stiffened, his knuckles whitening where they gripped the desk. He waved a dismissive hand, but the gesture had lost all its former authority. Industrial chemicals, a complex environment. One cannot account for every variable, Mr. Alistair Finch said. "Let us speak of another variable, then," explained Sherlock Holmes. Holmes produced from his coat a small cloth-wrapped object which he placed upon the gleaming desk. He unwrapped it to reveal the photographic plate. I knew it well, yet seeing it here, a ghostly accusation on the polished mahogany, sent a fresh chill down my spine. The ticking of the clock seemed to swell, filling the sudden heavy silence. "The widow of your last victim, a Mrs. Gable, kept her husband's work gloves in a larder next to a box of unexposed photographic plates. She mentioned to Dr. Bramwell that her husband's hands seemed to glow faintly in the dark, a strange luminescence which, as you see, has left its ghostly imprint upon the plate. Electricity does not glow after the fact, Mr. Finch, but other things do." Finch stared at the plate as if it were an adder poised to strike. A sheen of sweat beaded on his brow, and the colour drained from his face. His confident bluster vanished, replaced by a tight, defensive posture.
And for a moment I felt a flicker of something akin to pity for the man, so utterly exposed. "This is trickery, a mere parlour game. It proves nothing, I say," said Mr. Alistair Finch. His voice had thinned, losing its resonant timbre. Holmes watched him, his expression one of cold, academic interest. But I could feel the raw, human desperation radiating from the man. It was the sound of a world collapsing. "It proves exposure to a phosphorescent agent, which brings me to my final exhibit," replied Sherlock Holmes. He laid a single sheet of paper beside the fogged plate. It was a chemical analysis from Mr. Silas Thorne. Holmes's voice dropped, each word landing with the weight of a hammer blow. "Your new brilliant filament requires a special coating to achieve its signature incandescence, a coating derived from a substance that burns the skin, attacks the bone, and glows in the dark. The men were not electrocuted, Mr. Finch. They were poisoned by handling raw white phosphorus," remarked Sherlock Holmes. The facade did not crack, it shattered. The great Alistair Finch, titan of industry, seemed to shrink within his expensive suit. He sank back into his chair, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air. The hum of his great machines, the source of his power and wealth, now seemed to be counting down the final seconds of his reign. He was a man utterly cornered, and in the frantic, darting calculation of his eyes, I saw not just fear, but the chilling glint of a predator seeking one last, unthinkable escape. A profound silence fell in Mr. Finch's opulent office, absorbing all sound save the funereal tick of a grand clock. Between us, the chemical analysis lay upon his desk, a death warrant in stark white. Alistair Finch, the titan of industry, seemed to shrink before our eyes. His shoulders, once so square and confident, slumped, his posture collapsing as he stared at the paper, his face a mask of disbelief. Then the defeated man vanished. Finch drew a slow breath, and as he exhaled, his spine straightened until he stood at his full, imposing height. A thin, chilling smile touched his lips. He looked past the damning evidence to fix Holmes with eyes that once again burned with a formidable fire. "You are a truly remarkable man, Mr. Holmes. I have underestimated you. Such a mind, such a talent for minutia should not be wasted on petty criminals and domestic squabbles," said Mr. Alistair Finch. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur as the scent of leather and bay rum thickened perceptibly in the air. "This enterprise, this great work, requires men of vision, men who are not afraid of difficult decisions. There is a place for you here, a permanent consultancy. Name your price, sir, any price," responded Mr. Alistair Finch. Holmes did not move a muscle. His grey eyes were as cold and hard as chips of granite. "My price, Mr. Finch, is justice. It is a currency you appear to have long since squandered," Sherlock Holmes noted. The rejection, sharp and absolute, seemed to sever the last thread of Finch's composure. But instead of collapsing, he threw his head back and let out a short, humourless laugh. He began to pace before the hearth, his footsteps echoing on the parquet floor. "Justice? You speak of justice for a handful of labourers. I am speaking of destiny, of the electrification of this great nation. Do you have any conception, any at all, of what we are building here? A new world, Mr. Holmes, a world without shadows, powered by the very lightning we have harnessed. Mr. Alistair Finch said. His voice rose with a zealot's passion, hands gesturing wildly. He was no longer a cornered criminal, but a prophet preaching from his own pulpit.
You call it murder. I call it paving the road to the future. Do you think the great railways crossed continents without a single life lost upon the tracks? The men who died here, they were not victims. They were sacrifices. Unfortunate, yes, but necessary. They are the mortar that binds the foundations of a brighter age for millions yet to come. Their names will be forgotten, but their contribution, however unwitting, will be eternal. Mr. Alistair Finch answered. They were husbands and fathers, wondered Dr. John Watson. My voice, thick with revulsion, cut in, but Finch, lost in his own fervour, paid me no mind. He swept a hand towards the window, gesturing to the sprawling factory complex below, its chimneys belching smoke into the grey Lambeth sky. They were soldiers in a war for enlightenment, and in war there are always casualties. I did what was necessary to secure our victory over the competition, to ensure that this nation, not Germany or America, would lead the world into that new age. I am not a murderer. I am a patriot, Mr. Alistair Finch replied. His tirade was cut short by a sudden, authoritative rap upon the office door. The sound was so sharp and final, it made all three of us flinch. Before Finch could speak, the door creaked open, and Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard stepped into the room, his bulldog face set in grim lines. Two uniformed constables stood impassively behind him in the hall. "Alistair Finch," replied Inspector Lestrade. Lestrade's voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. It was the sound of the law, inexorable and plain. "I have a warrant for your arrest on the charge of murder. You are not obliged to say anything, but whatever you say may be taken down and used in evidence against you," remarked Inspector Lestrade. Finch stared at the inspector, his grand vision of the future colliding with the mundane reality of handcuffs. A flicker of contempt crossed his features, the last defiant gesture of a fallen Titan. He said nothing more as the constables stepped forward to flank him, their heavy boots scuffing quietly on the expensive rug. The return to Baker Street was a quiet affair, a stark contrast to the frantic energy that had propelled us through the preceding days. Outside, the November evening had drawn in, and the familiar clatter of carriage wheels on the wet cobbles seemed a muted and distant rhythm. Within our rooms, the only sounds were the soft hiss of the gaslight and the gentle crackle and pop of the logs in the hearth, which cast long dancing shadows upon the walls. Dr. Bramwell sat in the armchair opposite Holmes, her hands resting in her lap, her gaze fixed upon the flickering flames. The ordeal had etched new lines of fatigue upon her face, yet her expression held a profound and resolute stillness. Holmes, for his part, had sunk into his own chair, his chin upon his chest, his eyes closed. He was not asleep, however. I knew this posture as one of his deepest contemplations. "It is done, then. Mr. Finch will face justice," Dr. Eleanor Bramwell replied.
Her voice was low, devoid of triumph, heavy instead with the weight of lives that could not be returned. He will face a jury. Justice, Doctor, is a more complex machine, Sherlock Holmes noted. He opened his eyes, their grey depths sharp and clear as ever. He straightened himself, turning his full attention to our companion. You should know that Lestrade's success, and indeed my own small part in this, is entirely secondary. This victory does not belong to Scotland Yard, nor to me. It belongs to you, stated Sherlock Holmes. I did nothing but my duty, Mr. Holmes. I saw what was plain to see, Dr. Eleanor Bramwell answered. No, you did a great deal more. You saw what others chose to ignore. In a world rushing headlong into the future, you stopped to tend to those trampled underfoot. Your meticulous notes, your refusal to accept the easy explanation, that is not mere duty. That is integrity. It is a quality far rarer and more valuable than Finch's manufactured light, remarked Sherlock Holmes. A faint colour touched Dr. Bramwell's cheeks, the first I had seen all evening. She gave a slight, solemn nod, accepting the praise not for herself, but for the principle she embodied. Soon after, she rose to take her leave, and as I saw her to the door and down the 17 steps to the street, I felt we were bidding farewell not merely to a client, but to a truly remarkable colleague. When I returned, Holmes was standing by the window, peering down into the gas-lit street through a gap in the heavy curtains. The mantel clock ticked on, measuring the silence between us. A grim business, Holmes, to think of Finch believing himself a pioneer while his ambition was poisoning men from the inside out, wondered Dr. John Watson. Progress has always demanded its sacrifices, Watson. The flaw in men like Finch is that they feel entitled to choose who pays the price. He saw those men not as fathers and husbands, but as faulty components in his grand machine, explained Sherlock Holmes. He turned from the window, his expression unreadable. I moved to my writing desk and opened the worn leather ledger where I keep the records of our cases. Dipping my pen in the inkwell, I paused. The scratch of the nib against paper seemed unduly loud in the quiet room. I looked across at the title I had inscribed at the top of the page, The Adventure of the Lambeth Spark. A spark. It had promised a new dawn for London, a clean, bright light to banish the gloom. Yet its glow was fueled by a hidden, phosphorus fire that consumed the very men who built it. As an army surgeon, I have seen the cost of ambition on the battlefield, the price paid for a general's glory. Here, in the heart of the world's most advanced city, I had seen it again, merely fought with different weapons. And as I wrote the final lines of my account, a deep and unsettling question took root in my mind. In our relentless pursuit of a brighter future, how many more must be condemned to glow faintly in the dark?